Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Core studio. Welcome to the show. So today's deck tech is actually on an Omega level commander. Now what is an Omega level commander? It's a commander that is incredibly powerful and a massive threat. And the Omega level commander for this episode is Sheoldred the Apocalypse. Sheoldred is a 4/5 Phyrexian Praetor with Death Touch that costs 2 black. She has, whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life, and on top of that, whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. So Sheoldred, like all the other Phyrexian Praetors, is essentially one massive upside for you and one massive downside for your opponents. Kind of opposite ends of the same coin. Or maybe more so, the phrase is opposite sides of the same coin. Anyways, basically you get a massive benefit for something that you already want to do. Drawing cards, you are gaining life. So the more cards you draw, the more life you are gaining. And yeah, you can pad your life total in absolutely no time with a commander like this. And of course, on the other end of things, well, again, your opponents, for doing that exact same thing, which players love doing in Commander, drawing cards, you are going to be punishing them for it. And 2 life per card, every single card they draw is a ton. Especially since there are plenty of ways for us to actually force opponents to draw even more cards. So yeah, something that they really want. Again, more resources, more cards drawn is actually going to be a giant detriment to them. So yeah, Sheoldred is definitely a very impactful commander, a very powerful one, definitely an Omega level commander that, well, can be incredibly deadly. At 4 mana, it's decently low to the ground, so yeah, get this out early and often, draw some cards, gain some life, pad your own life total, and, force your opponents to draw even more cards than they would to take them down. Now, Sheoldred itself is not a budget-friendly card. In fact, I believe last time I checked, Sheoldred is around $50. That being said, the rest of the deck built around her is very budget-friendly, with every single card in the deck, again outside the commander, being less than $1. And as I'm going through the cards on this episode, I'm going to be breaking things down into different tactics to show you how this deck works and how we're going to win with it. And of course, if you are interested in this commander and in this deck, make sure you check out that deck list link in the description below. And now with all that said, let's jump into it. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can of course pay 2 to tap and sacrifice to get a basic land in the play tapped. Moving on, of course, we've got some great mana rocks as well, like Arcane Signet, which can tap for a black, Felwar Stone, which can do so most of the time, and Charcoal Diamond, which can also tap for a black, but it does enter the battlefield tapped. Speaking of which, there's Cold Steel Heart and Star Compass, which basically do the exact same thing. Cold Steel Heart, we have to actually choose a color when it comes into play. Star Compass can tap for a black if we've got a swamp in play, which we will. And then there's Ebony Fly, which comes into play tapped, but it can tap for a colorless. On top of that, we can actually pay to make it into an insect with flying, and when it attacks, we can give another target creature flying. But yeah, again, mana rocks that are low to the ground like these can be very helpful. So, also, we're going to be running Fractured Power Stone, Liquid Metal Torque, and Prismatic Lens, each of which can come into play untapped, unlike our previous ones we just talked about. They tap for a colorless, and Liquid Metal Torque on top of that can turn target non-land permanent into an artifact, and Prismatic Lens can filter mana if we really need it. Next up, we're also going to be running Mind Stone, which can tap for a colorless, so we can pay 1 to tap and sacrifice to draw a card. And speaking of sacrificing, there's Unstable Obelisk, which does cost 3 and tap for 1, so it's not as efficient, but we can pay 7 to tap and sacrifice to destroy target permanent. Moving on, we've got Hedron Archive, which can tap for 2, and we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice to draw 2 cards. And then Dreamstone Hedron's basically a bigger version of this, taps for 3, pay 3 to tap and sacrifice to draw 3 cards. And finally, speaking of drawing 3 cards, there's Coveted Jewel, which when it enters the battlefield, we draw 3 cards. It can tap for 3 mana of any one color, and on top of that, whenever one or more creatures the opponent controls attack you and aren't blocked, that player draws 3 cards and gains control of Coveted Jewel, untap it. So usually this would just be a massive upside for an opponent to attack us, but again, with our commander in play, if they attack us and gain control of this, well, they're going to be drawing 3 cards, but at the price of 6 life in total. And of course, by stealing this back from an opponent, we draw 3 and gain 6, so yeah, this can be massive throughout the game for us. But now that we've talked about ramping, well, what's next? Well, moving on, let's talk about some ways to actually force our opponents to draw some cards with Rune Servitor, Clockwork Fox, and Howling Golem. Rune Servitor is a 2/2, and when it dies, each player draws a card. So again, we are benefiting from that card draw, gaining an extra 2 life, and our opponents on the other end are going to be losing 2 life. So this is basically a way to drain our opponents and gain us some life on top of that card draw. Speaking of which, there's Clockwork Fox, which is a 3/2, and when it leaves the battlefield, we draw 2 cards and each opponent draws a card. So we get even more benefit out of this, and again, another way to drain our opponents. Speaking of which, there's Howling Golem, which is a repeatable draw effect. Whenever it attacks or blocks, each player draws a card. If this can stick around, it can definitely add up a lot throughout the game. Speaking of which, next up there's Girpor Orrery. It says each player may play additional land on each of their turns. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, that player draws 3 cards. So this can ramp players even quicker, which of course we'll talk about some ways and why ramping can be very crucial to this deck. But yeah, forcing players to draw 3 cards if they have no cards in hand can be a great way to drain our opponents if they get in that situation, or again for us, just a great way to gain some extra card advantage and to gain a lot of extra life. But of course we are nowhere near done with making our opponents draw cards just yet. So next up, let's talk about Sign in Blood, Blood Pact, and Atrocious Experiment. Sign in Blood says target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. So if we actually target ourselves with this, well, that is going to be draw 2, lose 2, but we're going to be gaining 4 thanks to our commander. So basically, we just net gain 2 life. And Sign in Blood's already a great card to target ourselves with in a lot of decks, and now this, yeah, just even better. But of course, if we want to target an opponent, this can be a massive way to drain our opponents. Again, just a 2-mana spell. They draw 2, lose 2, plus an extra 4 thanks to our commander. So 2 mana drain someone 6. Yeah, ouch. Speaking of which, at instant speed, we've got Blood Pact for just 1 mana more. Target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. And in a somewhat similar way, there's Atrocious Experiment. Target player mills 2 cards, draw 2 cards, and loses 2 life. But of course, we are nowhere near done with these kinds of cards just yet. For Voting Fruit says target player draws 2, loses 2, and if we spend at least 3 black mana to cast this, we get a food token. So yeah, some extra life gain if we need it. Whereas Painful Lesson just straight up target player draws 2 and loses 2, and then Fell Stinger is a 3/2 with Death Touch and Exploit. When it exploits a creature, target player draws 2 and loses 2. So keep in mind, if you need to, you can actually have this exploit itself. But we are still not done with making players draw cards. I mean, Infernal Offering says choose an opponent, you and that player each sacrifice a creature. Each player sacrifices a creature this way, draws 2 cards. And on top of that, choose an opponent, return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then that player returns a creature card from their graveyard to the battlefield. So with this, we can really punish a player, again, getting rid of one of their creatures and forcing them to draw to lose some life. Next up though, how about Damnable Pact, which can really take a player down. Target player draws X cards and loses X life. Basically, this is kind of like target player draws X cards and loses 3 times X life though, again, thanks to our commander. And speaking of a finisher though, there's Eldritch Pact, which says target player draws X cards and loses X life or X the number of cards in their graveyard. So yeah, later on in the game, this can be a 7 mana just take 1 player out spell. Or again, if we want to draw a ton of cards and gain some life, yeah, we can do that as well. But finally, how about a repeatable way to drain an opponent a lot throughout the game? Let's talk about Elder Brain. It has Menace, and whenever it attacks a player, exile all cards from that player's hand, and they draw that many cards. And then, of course, we get access to those exiled cards and can actually play them. But yeah, again, ensuring that our opponents have a good amount of cards in their hand is quite easy for this deck to do when we want to. So yeah, I mean, we can make it so that, someone, let's just say they're at 7 cards in their hand, right? We attack with this, they draw 7, lose 14 life just from that attack. So yeah, this can be very deadly. Now you might think we're done with drawing cards, but we're not quite there just yet. Because we're also going to be running some more ways to draw cards ourselves to benefit ourselves again from that life gain with Succumb to Temptation, which says you draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. And again, like Sign in Blood, whereas usually we'd be losing life on it, we actually net life with this. Draw 2, basically gain 4, lose 2, gain 2 overall. Next up, how about Reading the Bones? Scry 2, draw 2, lose 2. Again, just even better, gaining life while doing this too. Or how about Siphon Mine, which makes all of our opponents discard a card, and we draw a card for each card discarded this way, so basically, yeah, draw 3. And, gain 6 life in the meantime. And in a similar way, there's Ancient Craving and Ambition's Cost, which each do the exact same thing. Draw 3, lose 3, which again is basically going to be draw 3, gain 3. Or Promise of Power, which goes even bigger. Draw 5, lose 5, which again is draw 5, gain 5, thanks to our amazing commander. And speaking of amazing, well, how about Greed, an enchantment that has pay a black, pay 2 life, draw a card. Our commander essentially takes out all the downside of this card. Instead of having to actually pay life to actually draw cards, this again is just basically, hey, pay a black, draw a card. You basically, again, gain your life with your commander. It negates that life loss with this. And yeah, this is just a great repeatable way to draw an absurd amount of cards throughout the game. Speaking of which, there's Blood Tracker, which is somewhat similar. It has a flyer that we can pay a black and pay 2 life to get a counter on it, and when it leaves the battlefield, we draw a card for each counter on it. So this can draw us a ton of cards, or just be a massive threat. And then how about Cathopid's Soul Hoarder, a 6/6 flyer that says whenever a permanent owned by another player has been engraved from the battlefield, you draw a card and lose 1 life. So again, not only does it take away that downside, but it actually makes it into an upside. Whenever our opponent's permanents are put into graveyards, we are just gaining life and drawing cards. Now, as good as all these cards are, in my opinion, there is one that stands above the rest, and that is the Golden Pig of this deck, which of course is the #1 card out of 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Lich's Mastery. It's a legendary achievement for 3 black, 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 and it has hexproof, and it says you can't lose the game. Whenever you gain life, draw that many cards. Whenever you lose life for each 1 life you lost, exile a permanent you control a card from your hand or graveyard, and when Lich's Mastery leaves the battlefield, you lose the game. This essentially is a very interesting and very strange combo with our commander because, again, our commander says, hey, if you draw a card, you gain life. And this says, hey, when you gain life, you draw a card. So essentially with this and our commander in play, as soon as we either gain 1 life or draw a singular card, we basically just draw our entire library and gain a ton of life. That is going to be 2 life for each card. So if we've got 80 cards in our library, well, we are going to be gaining 160 life and drawing every single one of them. Now, normally you would, lose the game because you drew out your library, but again, with this, it specifically says you can't lose the game. So as long as this stays on the field, we cannot lose the game. It has hexproof, so it's really hard to deal with. And again, if we are losing life, we can just get rid of some of those cards in our graveyard or our hand, and eventually our permanents as well to make sure we can keep this in play. So yeah, this card is pretty absurd. It can be really difficult for us to actually get taken out when we play it, and yeah, again, we can just basically draw our entire library in absolutely no time with it. So yeah, Lich's Mastery, in my opinion, is definitely the Golden Pig of this deck. But of course, we've got plenty of other great cards to talk about. Because we also have even more punishing effects on top of our commanders, and let's talk about cards like Underworld Dreams, Fate Unraveler, and Ob Nixilis the Hate Twisted. These are all very similar. Underworld Dreams says whenever an opponent draws a card, Underworld Dreams deals 1 damage to that player. Fate Unraveler does the exact same thing, but it's on a creature, and Ob Nixilis basically does the exact same thing, but it's on a planeswalker. And on top of that, Ob Nixilis has -2 to destroy a target creature. Its controller draws 2 cards. So just doing that, taking out one of our opponent's creatures with this, force that player to draw 2 cards, and when they do that, well, Ob Nixilis is going to ping them twice, and then also our commander is going to drain them for 2 each. So that is a total of, hey, you drew 2 cards, you are losing 6 life. Have fun. But yeah, adding these on top of our commander can make our deck even deadlier. And speaking of Ob Nixilis, though, we're also running another Ob Nixilis with Ob Nixilis Reignited. It's +1 as you draw a card and lose 1 life, so again, we just basically gain life with that. -3 to destroy target creature, and -8 target opponent gets an emblem with. Whenever a player draws a card, you lose 2 life. So yeah, with that last one, that player is going to get taken out incredibly quickly. Speaking of which, there's Psychosis Crawler, which says its power toughness is equal to the number of cards in your hand, so this can be a big threat, and more importantly though, whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. So now, not only are we gaining life while we're drawing, we're also draining our opponents too. Speaking of that, Marauding Blight Priest, Epicure Blood, and Defiant Bloodlord are incredible in this deck. Marauding Blight Priest says whenever you gain 1 life, each opponent loses 1 life, and Epicure Blood does the exact same thing. So now, every single time we draw a card, we gain 2 life, and on top of that, our opponents go down 1. So it's basically a 3-point life swing just for us drawing a card. And then Defiant Bloodlord is actually more specific and more targeted in its approach. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. So again, we can gain a ton of life at once with a deck like this, and when we do so, we can drain out a player. Or we can just drain everyone very quickly with Grey Merchant of Asphodel. That's right, Gary is here as well. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life or extra devotion of black. You gain life or life lost this way. Again, we can drain our opponents very quickly with a commander like this one, and this can be a fantastic finisher. Or we can set our opponents up with something like Torgar Famine Incarnate. It does cost 6 black, but we can actually sacrifice creatures to make it cost less, and when it enters the battlefield, up to 1 target player's life total becomes half their starting life total rounded down. So this can just take someone right down to 20 life, and again, yeah, that's not going to take long to actually take that player out. What, they draw 10 cards, and they are gone. And of course, that can be even quicker. Again, we've got those cards like, Sign in Blood, which makes them lose life on top of that. Finally, though, let's talk about Chalice of Life, which we can tap to gain 1 life. And if we have at least 10 more life that are starting life total, we transform Chalice of Life. And it flips over to Chalice of Death, which can tap and target player loses 5 life. Again, with this commander, it's going to take us absolutely no time to get to 50 life. And yeah, again, getting to that backside can be incredibly deadly, just draining someone for 5 on a tap. But of course, we are nowhere near done with messing with our opponents just yet. So we also have some ways to throw wrenches in our opponent's plans, like Infernal Grasp, Feed the Swarm, and Introduction to Annihilation. Infernal Grasp can destroy any creature when we lose 2 life, but again, we've got plenty of ways to gain life, so yeah, that's no big deal at all. And then Feed the Swarm is going to destroy target creature and enchantment opponent controls. We lose life with that permanent's mana value. Again, that life loss is no big deal with this kind of attack. But we can also make an opponent lose life with Introduction to Annihilation, exile target non-land permanent, its controller draws a card. Next up, we've got Baleful Mastery, which actually can be cast for even cheaper by just paying 1 in a black. We can exile target creature Planeswalker, and when we pay that cost, we make that opponent draw a card. But we can also dish out a ton of pain with Pestilence, which says end of turn if no creatures are in play, sacrifice it, but of course we can pay a black to deal 1 damage to each creature and each player. So this can take out a lot of creatures, and also again, yeah, just take our opponent's life totals down even further, and yeah, take them out in many circumstances. Speaking of which, there's Deadly Tempest, which is going to destroy all creatures, and each player loses life with the number of creatures they control that were destroyed this way. Moving on, there's Necromantic Selection, which can destroy all creatures, and we get 1 creature back, and yeah, most of the time we're probably just going to get our commander right back because it's so valuable for this kind of attack. And we can also wipe the board, but keep our commander and our other creatures in play within Garruk's Wake, destroy all creatures and planeswalkers you don't control. And then Languish can take out quite a few creatures. All creatures get -4/-4 until end of turn, and yeah, our commander gets just under that with, again, the 5 toughness. But of course, we can also protect our commander with Blessing of Leeches. We can play at instant speed. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life, and yeah, that's no big deal with the amount of life that we can gain, and by paying 0, regenerate enchanted creature. And of course, we can also get our commander right back if it's going to get taken out with Feign Death and Undying Mouse, which basically do the exact same thing. Until end of turn, target creature gains. When this creature dies, turn the battlefield, tap, or no control they counter on it. But now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the lands. First up, we've got Gyreach Sanitarium, which has pay 2, tap, each player draws a card, then discards a card. So yeah, we can drain our opponents even with this land. And then Zhalfirin Void has enters the battlefield, scry 1 and contempt for a colorless, and Bojuka Bog also has a great ETB. When it enters the battlefield, exile cards to target player's graveyard. And of course, we're going to round out this deck with a bunch of basic swamps. But now that we've talked about every single card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, every single card in this deck outside the commander is less than $1, though Sheoldred itself is like $50, so yeah, the estimated cost for this deck is $75.67. And actually, that estimated cost does include swamps at 10 cents a piece, so if you already have those basic swamps, there's some extra savings there for you. And speaking of potential extra savings, you might be able to save even more by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavy played and damage cards, which of course need a home too. Though do keep in mind this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.